A broader question related to
Mhm.
the previous one. Who are the people, authors, writers, or personalities or causes that have inspired you?
Well, as we both know, the Cuban Revolution. When I realized that Fidel was speaking for the people who were exactly like my parents, speaking for the people whose children often had no shoes, and who had to build their own schools only to have the landlord burn them down. It was just very natural for me to feel that I had found a brother, that there was someone in the world who could see that and who was speaking to that inequity. And of course, right next to him was uh, uh, our dear bad God,
No worries.
Che. No, Che. I
Che
was getting a
Guevara.
little, yeah, I was getting a little confused because I also wanted to bring in Celia Sanchez. Now she is the revolutionary, totally good friends with both Che and Fidel, but she's rarely mentioned. I mean, and right there, you see that among the three of them, if it were left to them, this would not be. She would be honored. But because the world can only see, the masculine revolutionary, she's often lost. And without her, there probably
That's
would
right.
not have been a revolution.
Alice, let's talk again about Cuba, a country that is dear to us. What does the Cuban Revolution symbolize for you, and what does it symbolize for people who are the victims of racial, social, colonial, or imperial oppression?
Well, one thing, unfortunately, that it symbolizes is that you will be punished. Cuba has been punished for standing up, for trying to be different. And I think we should confront that head on and just say, this is probably what will happen. They will try to really erase everything you've done, eradicate every good thing that you did. And then the question would be, then what? I mean, do you continue to revolt? I mean, do you continue to try to have a different system? Do you go ahead or do you cave in? I mean, what do you do? And so, I often think about that with Cuba. It's suffering now. I mean, it's always suffered for, so many things. And I've been there. I've been there when it was, they had no gas. We had to, the cars would run out of gas and you have to push them. I mean, and now the food is short, for the poor people, it's very short. So it feels like a failure. And then you have to ask yourself, well, is this a failure if in fact most Cubans who would never be educated are educated? And that the
That's
ones
right.
who leave Cuba looking for a better life are educated Cubans. That means they can have a life. It's an interesting thing. I mean, Cuba is endlessly fascinating.
What do you think of the United States policy towards Cuba?
Terrible. The United States policy is one of punishment. It's a terrible thing. It's like being led by, 18th century Calvinists, people or even before that, by people who would burn you at the stake. It's a very punishing attitude, which is so hideous. It really makes America look so bad. I just wish America understood, that America, what it looks like to be so hard-hearted, while claiming to be a Christian country. You are basically making children go hungry, without shoes, older people without medicine. One time I went there and the maternity ward was just so sad. I mean, they had almost nothing, and they had no soap. I don't know how they kept things so clean. They did. But life does not really reward you for being mean to people. It doesn't, and that's why part of the reason why my country, the United States, is suffering. We're suffering. I mean, people still think that we're, great and blah blah blah. But look at our cities. Look at all the people who are hungry and on the street. I mean, this is suffering. And we're suffering because we, as the leadership, has lost compassion, if it ever had any.
You have met Fidel Castro on several times. What can you tell us about him, and what is your opinion on his legacy?
Well, he loved to talk, as the world knows. He had a good sense of humor. He knew something about everything. I mean, he was the most well-read, most up-to-date person I have ever met, except that he had never heard of female genital mutilation. And when I described it to him, he literally lost some of his color. But he was very disturbed. But he, like, typically he wanted to figure out a way to stop it. I mean, it was great. It was like finally meeting a really grown-up man who could feel for the suffering of women. It was remarkable. Uh, yeah, I really liked him. I mean, I really liked him. I felt that he was very human. He had this wide-ranging mind. I understood that neither he nor Che could dance, which I thought was just a pity because dancing is really crucial, to real understanding about earth, about what nature is and what the body connects to in dance. So I thought, oh, that's too bad. But other than that, I was really impressed, partly because he could listen. We were, a large table of people, and he could listen to all of us. And in the United States, I doubt that the people around that table would even be permitted close to our leadership, whoever it was, and they would not listen.
You have just published, Alice, a poem titled Earnest and Faithful in tribute to Che Guevara. Tell us about him.
Well, the first of all, I love translating their names, Ernesto and Fidel, that they actually mean earnest and faithful. I mean,
Right?
how beautiful is that? How poetic is that? Here they are, earnest and faithful, and they were. They were both really dedicated to what they were doing. They really had so much faith in the people, so much love for the people. Um, I was very, very happy to go and be as close to Che's bones as I could get in his crypt in Santa Clara. Because when I realized, as we all did, that they had murdered him and then they had buried him somewhere nobody knew where he was. They just done this terrible thing. And then there was that awful photograph where they were all the generals and all the, little people that they had, you know, gotten to help kill him. And they're all standing around his body. Well, that was a grief. It was very, very painful. And I think around the world, people suffered. And we were intended to suffer. They wanted us to suffer. So to finally know that Fidel, somehow he had found where they buried him and that he'd gone and reclaimed his bones and then brought him back to Cuba and to Santa Clara, it was a big deal. And I was very happy to eventually, as soon as I got back to Cuba, to go to be there as close to him as I could get um, from real admiration and love and respect.
Alice, you are fully committed to the fight for the promotion of human rights. However, in the West, Cuba is often singled out on this issue. How do you view these accusations?
Well, I understand them. If Cuba succeeds, if it had succeeded in its own vision, it would have made almost every other country look retarded. And well, maybe not Finland, which I like. I like Finland a lot. I think they're very progressive. But many other countries and the ones who hate Cuba, they hate Cuba because it was trying something new, something different. Now, many people will just say, "Oh no, they were trying to be communists," but that's really a misreading. I think they became part of the quote communist, you know, not regime, but their network. out of desperation because at some point they had nothing. I mean, they had been reduced to not even having chicken feed. I remember this very clearly because I raised chickens. And so they ended up, becoming more communist than they would have if they had been permitted to be free without being that, without connecting to communism and communist countries. What was the rest of the question?
So how do you view these accusations? But you understand.
No, no, I understand. And they're typical. I mean, what can they do but accuse Cuba of failing when they have made Cuba fail? I mean, the Cuba of the real dream of Cuba. They made sure that that was killed. And so then, I was saying earlier that I saw somewhere that there was a program called How Castro Destroyed the Cuban Economy. What economy? What economy? The peasants, the people who would be my people, they were out there cutting cane from sun up to sundown, no shoes, no schools, not even able to read and write. And part of what the revolution did immediately was to teach people how to read and write. So it could be that, the level of poverty that I understand is a level that some of the people in office just they don't understand it because they've never had to endure it. I mean, and that's putting it more or less generously.